Seeking perfection in your art, it's unrealistic. And not because you're bad at it, but because you don't know when to stop. Every time you try to fix it, you make it worse. What if I told you that the problem isn't your art, but the need to make it perfect? In Japan, there's this philosophy that goes against this belief, called Wabi-Sabi, the beauty of imperfection. But how can this philosophy help you? And not just in your art, but in any discipline. Today, I'm gonna show you how an incomplete plein air, Japanese gardens, and even castles reflect this same idea. Hello, my name is Isaac Puig. If this is your first time in this channel, I'm a multimedia artist that is currently traveling through Japan on a 15-day plein air trip. My mission? To paint and explore the most iconic places throughout Japan, and maybe convince you to start doing plein air. Plein air and sketches, by nature, are imperfect. The weather and the lighting changes, the environment around you changes, and your own mental state can be affected. That's why, in such a small amount of time, it's nearly impossible to create a perfect piece of art. If that was the objective, I would probably not even get out of my studio. This painting was done on my third day in Hiroshima. I couldn't finish it because the end of the day was drawing near. Basically, we got here once the sun was already setting. I actually ended up drawing it and inking it when it was dark. I had this idea that I was gonna draw it here and then finish it up on my studio.
We are at the Chukeien garden in Hiroshima. I'm trying to find a good spot for painting, for setting up and painting. Sometimes when I do plein air, it's pretty hard to try and find a spot, like the perfect spot to paint. So sometimes it's just better you see something and you paint it. Maybe if you find somewhere to sit down in a shadowy area, that would be a good spot.
In plein air, there is not such thing as Control-C, no absolute control and no perfection. And that's the reason I think every plein air we do, it's full of Wabi-Sabi. Even within Japanese culture, Wabi-Sabi, it's a term that you can't really describe. Wabi-Sabi has its root in Taoism, originally from the Song Dynasty in China, and was later integrated into Zen Buddhism.
Ay, pues yo creo que eso de allá está bien difícil.
Wabi speaks of the beauty and the elegance on the mundane. Sabi speaks of the passing time and how the time influences the wear and tear of everything around us. Together, they form a profound Japanese philosophy, finding beauty in imperfection, in incompleteness, and in the transitory. For me, there's no better way of practicing this and understanding it than painting outdoors, especially in a Japanese garden.
The reason I'm sketching small is so I can test out the composition, because it's really hard right now because it's cloudy, and then there's a lot of trees and there's no separation between foreground and backgrounds, so I'm gonna have to exaggerate it and try to create that separation. So I'm doing working out the composition, see what I'll leave and what I'm gonna be removing.
Not all Japanese gardens are the same. They vary greatly in their origin and design. There are 5 types of Japanese gardens, with 3 that stand out. There are dry gardens, tea gardens, courtyard gardens, stroll gardens, and finally shinden gardens. But what kind of garden is this one? This type of garden, it's actually called Chisenkaiyu. It's designed around a small lake or stream. This type of garden allows visitors to experience different types of landscapes, all surrounding the central lake. Chakei, it's a concept that has existed in Japan for a long time, even long before it was given a name. It consists on bringing distant landscape into these gardens. And the name of this garden, the one we're at, it's called Shukeien. It translates to English as literally miniature landscape garden. The idea is to collect and miniaturize numerous panoramic views, and according to tradition, this is a miniature garden inspired by Shihu or West Lake in Changyu, China. Valleys, mountains, and forests are represented in miniature in these landscapes through careful cultivation of the soil and vegetation. This garden mimics different natural formations and panoramic views of this place in China. The entire garden is connected by a path that encircles the central body of water. Walking along this path is the best way to enjoy it. Although the garden isn't very large, it gives you the feeling that it's way bigger than it actually is, because every place that you explore seems like a separate garden on itself. Something that I love about this garden and some other Japanese gardens is that if you visit in different seasons, you can appreciate a very different garden. In spring, there are many flowers. In summer, the rainy season, the garden is extremely green. In autumn, everything turns red. And in the winter, many trees lose their leaves, and sometimes there's even snow. But even so, the garden remains very beautiful. These Japanese gardens are meticulously designed to evoke different feelings, primarily tranquility, introspection, and a sense of harmony. In fact, the reason I come back to Japan every time and came to paint, it's temples and gardens. These things are among my favorite things to visit. When you paint with gouache or watercolor, every stroke stays. That's the reason every stroke remains on a plein air. It's like sketching with ink. What is done will stay, and you have to learn to live with it and adapt to the mistake that just happened. For example, if you paint digitally, Ctrl-C or undo repeatedly saves you from mistakes. In fact, that is one of the reasons I stopped painting digitally. Being so perfectionist and constantly striving for this type of perfection was overwhelming. So over time I started thinking that maybe if I moved to traditional, I would have to learn to accept all of these mistakes as simply part of the process. Once the color touches the paper, it becomes part of painting forever. All of this reflects something deeper, which is that fear of making mistakes. I feel that many beginners, and even me when I started, have. And as we gain experience as artists, we have to learn to live with mistakes because there will always be mistakes. We cannot be perfect artists or perfect people. In Taoism, perfection has a different meaning. It is actually considered the equivalent of death, a state in which no further growth is possible. Something perfect cannot change and no longer evolve. So what are we really chasing when we're trying to improve a painting or a work of art we are working at? By overworking art or anything created by a human, it's eliminated because we keep trying to remove all these imperfections. And those imperfections are the body and the soul of what we are creating. These imperfections are cracks, and through these cracks, you can see the soul of the artist peeking through. And actually, I believe this is also the place where we found our own style and voice. This is precisely where Wabi-Sabi comes in. In Wabi-Sabi, the artwork is not separate from its creator. It's an extension of them. I find this like mind-blowing. It's an extension of what I smelled, of the people I talked to. The only way to truly grasp this is by being there, being present, experiencing this very moment. These gardens typically allow moss to grow naturally and cover the stones and everything. The moss is just left there to flourish. In these gardens, they also use materials that weather over time. This creates a sense of the garden being alive. As some things decay and some other stuff grows, it mimics nature, which also makes it timeless. The seasons affect the garden, fostering an acceptance of the natural cycles of life. There's also seasonal awareness, which is called kisetsu. As well, the selection of trees, sakuras for the spring, maples for fall. This makes the visitor aware of the passing of time, reminding them to appreciate the ephemeral beauty. Another very important point is the soundscapes. The sound of water flowing through a little piece of bamboo and falling into a body of water, or waterfall falling into the stones, relax you to such an extent that the stressful noise of daily life disappear for a moment, being replaced by a precious feeling of security and tranquility.
I was just doing a review for some Pentel brushes, and I was doing some studies of these guys, and I find them super weird and super cool. I love them. I have to paint more of them. Probably after this trip, I'm gonna do more painting involving koi fish. It's a little bit of cliche, but I don't know. There's some cliches that I really love. I was reading somewhere that koi fish were like farm fish, and the Chinese brought them to Japan. And I have no idea what they taste like. I don't even know if people eat them anymore. Maybe in China they do. Maybe in Japan, I don't know.
This painting of the garden, I think I overdid it. It came to a point where I saw the painting and I told myself, okay, I went too far with it. Overworking a painting, it's a mistake that we have to accept. I would have liked that I stopped adding stuff to the painting like 5 minutes before I actually stopped. I feel like I added way more color than I needed on the water, and I ruined the contrast between the foreground and the background, but again, mistakes happen. On the other side of the pond, this was like this rocky beach where I was looking at the turtles and the fish. This beach mimics a rocky shore where the fish come close. It's pretty shallow. You can actually hear the fish fluttering around and people actually feed them. This causes the effect of the fish making even more noise. These paths are designed to be irregular or zigzag. These types of zigzag paths forces you to walk more slowly, which forces you to appreciate the scenery even more. And they also give you this feeling that they are way longer than they actually are. They make an amazingly use of space here. This is another element that forces you to be present in the moment. Hiroshima Castle was built in the late 16th century by Daimyo Mori Terumoto, a powerful feudal lord who chose this area because of its strategic location near the sea, inland from trade routes. Construction began around 1589 on a plain, which is unusual, as many Japanese castles are built on top of mounds, so they would look more powerful and bigger. This castle is a perfect example of a plains castle. It functions not only as a military fortress, but also as a political and administrative center of the domain. It was surrounded by wide moats and canals connected to the river delta. Its main tower dominated the city as a symbol of power. If you like art, travel, or Japan, don't forget to subscribe, because the next part is coming soon. If you like the video so far, you can also watch the previews and the first episode over here. I really love this illusion that they create in Japan, that the castles float over water. That's the reason I decided to paint this castle entrance. It's quite impressive on its own. This drawing of the castle entrance was done doing a pencil and pen technique, where first I applied everything with a multi-liner pen, fine liner pen, and then over the top I added watercolor so you could still see the line work behind the watercolor. This allows the lines to remain visible and keep this watercolory look, which is the second style I'm using in this 15-day plein air trip in Japan. I really like the results of this painting. I think I liked more this one than the garden painting. Probably because it was the second one I did this day. And as time goes by and the days go by, you kinda start accepting Wabi-Sabi in your work and just let go of the conception of making mistakes and just start enjoying more what you are doing. You let go and you just accept that mistakes are part of the process. And when we understand this and enjoy the process, we also end up enjoying the results more. It's very important to remember that Wabi-Sabi, it's not an excuse to abandon artistic discipline or to stop learning. And this comes from someone that considers himself quite a perfectionist and who has struggled for years to let go of this perfectionism in order to go out and paint in a limited time. I feel like this is part of the reason I started painting outside, to learn to live with these mistakes. This castle and the surrounding area look incredibly beautiful. It feels like it has been like this forever, but that's not the case. We must remember that in 1945, the atomic bomb that fell in Hiroshima destroyed everything. The garden, the gate, and the castle were mostly rebuilt.
These eucalyptus survived the nuclear blast.
The rebuilt construction of the castle was part of the effort to reclaim the city and the historical heritage. It was very important for the people of Hiroshima to rebuild this castle, which had stood impressively for hundreds of years over the Hiroshima horizon. Instead of using traditional techniques, a modern reinforced concrete structure was chosen. However, the exterior largely respects the castle's original feudal character.
I find it pretty mind-blowing that after the Hiroshima bomb fell,
In some temples or statues that commemorate the victims, they leave water bottles because when the bomb fell, people asked desperately for water because they were all burned. But in reality, it didn't do much good. I find it pretty moving or impactful that people leave water bottles here to satisfy that insatiable thirst. After painting the garden and then this other painting of the castle gate, it seemed like a great idea to end up the day in front of the castle and do a painting of the castle with the sunset behind. Part of my mission with this Japanese plein air trip, it's to get people to start doing plein air or just go outside, grab a pen or a pencil and start sketching. Any medium that makes it easy for you to go outside and paint. Even maybe an iPad could work. That really allows you to enjoy and get to know a place better. There's a big difference between seeing and observing. And when we paint or we draw, we observe, we do not see.
I'm gonna continue later. Right now since I can barely see, I'm finishing with pen because I wanted to keep going. But I'm gonna probably add watercolor some other time. So the third day is coming to an end. It's been cool, but at the same time pretty tough. Doing plein air doesn't always work the way we want it to work. Sometimes we don't like the end result, sometimes we do. Sometimes there's mosquitoes, sometimes you stress out because you don't like what you're doing. The weather doesn't always help. Sometimes you have the time pressure because they're gonna close or the light is gonna change. And then carrying all the equipment, it's like I have like 10 kilos in my back. And it's time to grab a snack, something to eat, go back to the Airbnb, clear the SD cards and prepare the day for tomorrow.
So I'm gonna start painting and finish up the painting that I didn't finish on location. This is the painting of the castle that I didn't have time on the spot to finish. I don't really remember the colors that I had that day. I remember a little bit of the feeling, so I'm gonna have to use a photo. The photo, as usual, looks pretty different from what I saw that day, so I'm gonna use a combination of what I remember and the photo that I took. The first thing I'm gonna do for this painting is that I have to get the feeling that we're seeing the castle from behind and everything is in shadow and that the sunset is on the background. When we paint with watercolor, we always work in layers, adding more color as we go. If we want to darken an area, we just keep adding more layers to that area. What I'm trying to do right now is to add some colors and have the sky ready so I can start creating intensity on the shadow and then create contrast between the foreground and the background. I liked how this painting of the castle turned out. To be honest, I think I like it more before I added the watercolor, because the ink drawing was done on location and it had that feeling that you get when you do something on location. And now that I'm painting on the studio, I feel like I muddied that memory somehow because I painted over what I did that day. But you know, this is part of a series and all of these paintings were gonna have color, so I had to do it anyway. The thing that stayed with me the most on this second day of my 15-day trip across Japan was the Japanese philosophy Wabi-Sabi and the implication it has on accepting your own mistakes and what you learn from them. I always tell my students, and I always keep telling myself, that we have to create the most amount of mistakes in the least amount of time possible. This would make learning less of a burden since we accept them as part of the process. The only real way of learning is making mistakes. Think of a little kid, how do they learn? When they try to walk, they keep falling down until they walk and then they will gradually run. Ever since I've been trying to apply this philosophy to my work, my learning process has become way more fun and way faster than what it used to be. If I don't like what I'm currently doing, I just finish it and move on. We have to remember that any expert in any discipline has made thousands of mistakes, and that's normal. That is what it makes him an expert. In my opinion, our own creative voice comes from making these mistakes and finding ways to solve them. So if you're frustrated because you're trying to find your own style, just keep the mistakes coming and find ways to solve them, and you'll see how you will start developing a style. All these aspects of the Japanese culture have this philosophy embedded within them. Gardens, stone sculptures, architecture, traditional paintings, temples, art. Wabi-Sabi is everywhere. If you currently are trying to get better at art or any discipline, my most sincere recommendation for you would be try to make the most amount of mistakes in the least amount of time possible. Don't get sad or frustrated. Mastery might be just around the corner. And the enjoyment of the craft, it's already here if you decide that it is. I promise you, if you keep at it, you will get better and your confidence will grow. And trust me, because this comes from someone extremely perfectionist. I've had a hard time learning to let go. And it's actually something I work every day on. And I might have to always do, but we have to remember, mistakes are part of the process. Which of these three paintings was your favorite painting and why? Was it the one of the garden? The one of the entrance to the castle? Or the castle itself? Also, let me know, how do you deal with mistakes? Is there anything you've learned to make the learning process faster? I would love to know. Let me know in the comments below. Near Hiroshima, over the sea, there's a place you can only reach by boat. Standing in the water, there's a massive torii gate, a gate to the spiritual world. Believed in Shinto that torii gates mark the entrance to the spiritual world. This place has a name, an island called Miyajima. I invite you to stay tuned for the next episode.